The Maurin Academy is a 21st century agronomic university. We draw inspiration from the life and work of Peter Maurin, co-founder along with Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement, as well as from various intellectual and practical engagements with other currents of thought. Maurin envisioned agronomic universities, places where people could learn about life, culture, agriculture, science, and religion together. And he envisioned houses of hospitality, places that, quote, bring the scholars to the workers or the workers to the scholars. These tenets are at the core of the Maurin Academy's mission. The inspiration for this particular class is chapter 5 of Wiersbe's book, which is entitled Life Through Death, Sacrificial Eating, and has a lot to do with the concept of sacrifice and then, how our life, how our experience with food and how we gather food enters into that. And so we're going to get into some topics that might be, maybe you've thought about this a lot. Maybe you haven't thought about this at all. For some people, it might even be just a little bit like disturbing. And for other people, it's going to be old hat. And for a lot of folks, maybe in between. Spencer and I were talking not long ago, and he mentioned this quote from Joseph de Maistre, who's actually a reactionary, sort of like anti-French revolutionary French thinker from the 19th century, I want to say. Yes. Or maybe late 18th century. And this quote that he recalled really does kind of sum up, I think, part of the feeling of this chapter. De Maistre says, the entire earth, perpetually steeped in blood, is nothing but an immense altar on which every living thing must be immolated without end, without restraint, without respite, until the consummation of the world, until the extinction of evil, until the death of death. There's a lot packed into this quote. But for a lot of us, especially living in the 21st century, a lot of us who haven't really directly experienced the fairly routine letting of blood in our in order to obtain our diet, if we are meat eaters, we might not even know what de Maistre is talking about. And yet, if we step back and we think about it, it's impossible not to accept this fact. Maybe it's put rather dramatically here, but we live and everything lives in the world because other things have died. We've talked about, the sort of natural cycle in the plant world a little bit, and how, plants basically live off of the fertilizer that they themselves create through the mulch that they automatically do when they die back down to the ground, and they become part of the soil. And all of our leavings that we leave behind from our eating and our processing of food becomes part of the soil, and so on and so forth. The world is set up this way, and we don't completely understand why it's set up this way, but it is. And therefore, one of the things that Wiersbe is grappling with is how do we think about this, right? How do we first come to grips with it? And then what does this really mean? He says, eating is the daily reminder of our creaturely mortality. It might not be if we don't contemplate what we're doing, but if we do, it's hard for us not to understand that we are a part of this process, which is pretty universal in anything that lives, that there's a certain predatory nature to it, that things consume each other, that things penetrate each other, are oftentimes, we might think, parasitical on each other, or coexisting and living off of each other's lives and deaths. And because we're more conscious and aware, than probably any other creature on the planet. This gives us more heartburn. Um, it's uncomfortable. I think we want to think that we're not a part of that process, and yet he consistently insists that we are. Um, and that when it comes right down to it, we have to accept that all of us, including human beings, live because other living creatures, plant, insect, animal, have died. And that is the way the world is set up. And our impulse, because we are conscious, because we are creatures who can think of the past and well into the future, and we can prognosticate and predict, and we can contemplate and, yeah, contemplate. Our impulse is to try to figure out how to deny death, to not think about it. Um, And the reason why I have the Tai Chi walking graphic there is because, like, that's the latest thing that you see on Instagram, and I assume Facebook and other social media too, is folks that are actually going to tell you that by doing Tai Chi walking, which is very relaxing and everything, but is hardly athletic. And it's not athletic enough that it's going to create this six pack on anybody, right? But it's going to, like, you see these ads where 2 weeks, 4 weeks of Tai Chi walking turns grandma into like a hot babe with gray hair, and so that's just not true. Like that guy says down the bottom, ridiculous. It really is. But yet, this is one of many messaging campaigns for many years that has tried to sell us on the idea that there is some sort of formula, either for diet or for exercise or for like herbal remedies or even, pulsing light therapy, all sorts of things. Like some of these things can do some things to improve a person's appearance, but they can't actually save us from aging. And the implication here, in addition to just being maybe draining of our energy and our finances, is that we're not comfortable with aging and with dying to the point where we will spend a lot of money if we have it, or just, take a lot of time trying to prevent it. And so, he sees this as a problem. He says that many in our society are attempting to secure life as a private possession to be protected and extended at all costs. And we're doing this because we don't personally want to think about ourselves being a part of this process in which we too will die. We will return, our bodies will return to the ground at any rate. And we do this also when we like sequester ourselves in like airtight coffins, as though I don't know what we're trying to get at there, but preserving our bodies at all costs, even after death. Um, so it says that we are maybe more than previous eras of human existence really, really uncomfortable with this. And this, in his view, is because we have gone through quite a few developments in which we can at least psychologically feel separate from the cycle. We can feel as though we're not a part of it and that we are above it and that we can control it. These two pictures resonated with me because, like, there's now a trend for very young girls in particular, but probably boys are going to chime in on this too, of like practicing all sorts of skincare routines to make sure that they look their best at every age. So they're getting started really young now with an insecurity. I don't think all of this is like terribly bad, but I think uh, when when your main source of maybe your value, your sense of self-worth comes from you're looking a certain way or remaining young forever, that it creates a great deal of anxiety and lack of confidence, and ultimately, perhaps, is a poor use of time. The other picture comes from the movie Don't Look Up. Some of you remember that was a movie from a couple of years ago where an asteroid is hurtling to Earth, and nobody in America wants to really acknowledge the reality of this like deadly asteroid hurtling to Earth. But the elites do know it's going to happen, so they've created cryo chambers to like preserve their bodies in, and they're going to shoot themselves into space. They're aiming at some planet that's habitable, and at the end of the movie, they land. Everybody on Earth, I guess, is dead from the asteroid, and Meryl Streep is one of the first people, maybe the first person to walk out. Some people don't make it, but there they are on that planet. But you get the distinct sense that they are like, so now what we do? Now what do we do? Okay. Um, but this is not really totally science fiction. There are people who are working very hard, and many of them are in kind of like the Silicon Valley elite who are trying to figure out how to extend their lives and maybe even live forever, or to preserve their lives until the technology exists that can make them immortal. So I guess these things to me express the extreme uh, re- revulsion to the idea of death. And yet, this cycle of life and death, and of life giving way to death, and then death bringing forth life, is such an ingrained pattern in the entire world around us that it's it's hard but not impossible to ignore. These are a couple of quotes from chapter 5, where Wiersbe's emphasizing how the Bible deals with this. He sort of paraphrases these, so I don't think these are exact quotes, but the seed that yields the fruit of life must first die into the ground. Um, this is an image we're all familiar with, is that, a seed must bury itself in the ground. The plant that yields it has to die for the seed to be released in the first place. I have perennials growing in my yard, and when they become fertile is really in the moment of death, when they release what they've built through their blooms, and as they become brittle and as the weather pounds them down, those seeds are buried in the ground, and then you don't see anything until the next spring, and then they spring to life. The picture for the course is my arugula plants. And I have wild arugula growing in my yard wherever it wants to grow. And that's exactly what it does. I don't do anything, but I let it grow, bloom, and die. And then next spring, I have more arugula. Um, Also, he quotes this passage: the passage from death to genuine life is a loving movement of self offering in which people lay down their lives for others in gestures of nurture and help. And so he's extending the idea of death into giving of your life. And one of the messages that he has is that a person has lived a good life, that if that person passes on wisdom and, care, and has cared for the things that they're responsible for, and this is kind of their fruit, their product that then lives on after them, that keeps the cycle going. So there's this point in the chapter where he begins to really think deeply about the concept of sacrifice and people's musings about sacrifice in the Old Testament, and then, how also the New Testament and the Bible changes that. But not only in the Jewish religion, but in many others, there's this concept of sacrifice. And along with it can come this idea that, from the modern point of view, that it is simply kind of a pressure release valve, that there's nothing to it except for that people needed scapegoats, and they needed something to kind of do their magic on, and they needed to vent their violence. And then, that would make them feel better and they would be able to move on or have confidence. So this is one reaction. But he says a more a better reaction to this, a more nuanced reaction to it, is not that this was just God's concession to our primitivism and violence, but rather that this was a genuine human response to the world that God gave us. If people experienced the world, the plants and the animals around them, and how they were sustained by them, and how they were developed more fully through their labor with them, then giving up a part of that gift from nature, from God, um, it became a way of saying, I have confidence in this process that it will provide, that I am a part of this community, or I am a part of this world that has been created. And so I don't have to hang on to every little piece of what I've gathered. I can give the first fruits. So it's this, and it's also giving that which one cares the most about, because when people for many centuries worked with it directly and had to care about it in intricate detail to keep it alive, to keep it thriving so that it would be fruitful for them, it was a very precious thing. So acknowledging that this is very precious, it would be your time and your care and your emotions and attachment and need being given back in gratitude to the world that gave it to you and to the God that gave it to you. So he argues that its original purpose was not some sort of concession to people's violence and primitivism, but rather it reminded us of the gratitude for the gift of life, and also of the inevitability of death, and the fact that death is not the thing to be most concerned about, that there's something more important than death, and that's the continuation of life.